Liberalism, section. Liberal system of policy, liberality of sentiment, and the institution of slavery. To understand the spread of the political use of the term liberal in its various senses, we must remember two reference points. The first is the proud self-consciousness that matured in the wake of the victory achieved during the 7 Years' War over the France of monarchical and religious absolutism, which was subsequently reinforced in England by the outcome of the Somerset case. The second is the struggles that developed within the community of the free. When the controversy provoked by the agitation of the rebel colonists erupted, the various positions confronting one another all tended to define themselves as in some sense liberal. Burke sought to promote conciliation, calling upon, quote, the liberal government of this free nation to evince a spirit of compromise. Across the Atlantic, at the moment when the United States was founded, Washington emphasized, quote, the benefits of a wise and liberal government, or a liberal system of policy, which asserted itself, quote, in such an enlightened, in such a liberal age, and which had as its basis the free cultivation of letters, the unbounded extension of commerce, or liberal and free commerce, the progressive refinement of manners, the growing liberality of sentiment, with the prevalence of a liberal sentiment, of tolerance also regarding relations between, quote, every political and religious denomination of men in this country, end quote. Hitherto, the term liberal has occurred solely as an adjective. In other contexts, adjective and substantive are interchangeable. Quote, every liberal Briton, wrote the London Gazette in 1798, rejoiced at the problems facing revolutionary tyrannical France, which had to confront the difficult situation created by the uprising of the black slaves in San Domingo. Finally, the term in question made its appearance as a noun. Signing himself, quote, a liberal, was the author, possibly Paine, of an article in the Pennsylvania Packet of 25th March 1780, which came out for the abolition of slavery. Here we have 4 interventions, which share a liberal profession of faith, but with orientations that are fairly diverse as regards black slavery. In Europe, while stances in favor of it were not wanting, a critical orientation was prevalent. A more or less clear distance tended to be taken from the institution that had had to be repressed to the colonies, in order to confer credibility on the self-consciousness developed by the community of the free. The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith's masterpiece, which appeared the same year as the Declaration of Independence drafted by Jefferson, a preeminent representative of Virginia's planters and slave owners, observed that the liberal reward of labor, with the payment of a wage that the, quote, free servant and free man could freely dispose of, was the only thing likely to stimulate individual industry, while economic stagnation was the result of servile labor, whether serfdom or slavery proper. In his turn, Millar regarded the institution of slavery as in contradiction with, quote, the liberal sentiments entertained in the latter part of the 18th century, with the, quote, more liberal views developed in the modern world. Going still further, the great economist's disciple declared that credibility could be restored to the, quote, liberal hypothesis only by avoiding its confusion with those who waved the flag of liberty while preserving and, in fact, developing the practice of slavery. Across the Atlantic, by contrast, defense of that institution was much fiercer. Yet it would be mistaken to construct a clear-cut opposition. It is sufficient to reflect on the fact that the tutelary deity of the slaveholding South was, in the first instance, Burke. In 1832, an influential Virginian ideologue, Thomas R. Dew, lauded the advantages of slavery. Quote, the menial and low offices were reserved for blacks, so that love of liberty and the republican spirit, peculiar to free white citizens, flourished with a purity and vigor unknown in the rest of the United States, and had a precedent only in classical antiquity. But in saying this, Dew appealed to Burke and his thesis that, where slavery flourished, the spirit of liberty developed more abundantly. In this way, the theorist of the slaveholding South indirectly adopted and subscribed to the British Whigs' quote, liberal profession of faith. In subsequent decades, during the struggle against the North, which was initially political and then military, the slaveholding South could count on many friends in liberal England. A few years before the Civil War, the arguments of the Southern ideologues were explicitly echoed by Benjamin Disraeli. With the abolition of slavery in British and French colonies behind him, he characterized the abolition of slavery as, quote, a narrative of ignorance, injustice, blundering, waste, and havoc, not easily paralleled in the history of mankind, end quote. In America, if they mixed with the blacks, the whites, quote, would become so deteriorated that their states would probably be reconquered and regained by the Aborigines, end quote. Would the abolition of slavery in the United States not encourage this admixture, imparting a novel dignity to it? Later, the Secessionist Confederacy's desperate struggle met with a profoundly sympathetic echo from prominent cultural and political representatives of liberal England, provoking the indignation of John Stuart Mill. On the occasion first of the Somerset case, then of the American Revolution, and finally of the Civil War, the liberal world appeared profoundly divided over the problem of slavery. How are we to find our bearings in this seeming chaos? End section.